But I want to talk about how to choose the best forage variety. I wanted to highlight, before I get into the details, our UK Forage website. If you Google KY Forages, this is what you'll see. The Forage website is very popular, very widely used. I'm going to comment mainly today on variety trials. Okay, so if back on the Forage website, you clicked on the Forage variety trials, this is what you're going to see. And then you can go to any of the reports, and I'll give you some examples in just a minute. You can also go there at the bottom to the archived variety reports and see testing going all the way back. I think we go back as long as 2004. So, you saw on the video some overhead shots of the variety testing program, but we want to zero in and talk about, how do you get the information out of what Gene's getting from harvesting these individual plots. You can click on the red and white clover report. 2019, that's the current one. That's because the latest testing is what we had from last season. You could click on the red and white clover grazing tolerance report. You'll notice we talked about that. We have yield testing. We also have testing for what varieties survive best under grazing. At the end of both of these reports, there's also a summary, a long-term summary of the performance of the red and white clover varieties. But many people have found that if they just go to this one report, so it's the current one's the 2019 long-term summary of Kentucky Forage variety trials. You notice on the right-hand side there, it's a listing of all the different trials that Gene is running. Like he's harvesting close to maybe even more than 5,000 individual plots, taking several harvests from those each year. So we have everything there from white clover, tall fescue, timothy, down into the warm seasons, down into even crabgrass is improved varieties, and we want to show you how that could be a potential for your farmer, maybe not a potential. So let me talk a little bit more detail about white clover, since I've mentioned that summary report. So like I say, every individual report at the end has a table that's a summary. The summary report then would accumulate all of those summaries of each species and put those together. So here's from the yield of white clover in the summary report. Very large. In fact, I've even had to cut it in the middle because it's a lot wider than I could put on the screen. All the summary reports are the same way, that we have a list of varieties. Again, this is white clover. We have the type of white clover, because that varies. The Ladino are larger type. The Dutch are common white clover that tend not to be as productive, but can be very long-lived. The weedy type white clover we have that grows in our yards or in bare areas and pastures that never gets very tall is also a Dutch type. The intermediate type is in between, a hybrid between the Ladino and the Dutch, performing better under grazing often than the Ladino. All the numbers in the middle represent the percentage of growth of each of these varieties. What I mean by that is 100% would be average. So what you're looking for in these reports is you're looking for varieties that are better than 100, better than average. And usually the easiest thing is to go over to the mean or the average over time. And so this top variety here, you may not be able to read this very well, but it's 116%. That means 116% of average. So it's above average. Let me go to the next one because I can show this to you easier. So there's that top one that was 116%. Beside it is a number in parentheses. It says 2. That means it's been in 2 trials. And so you might say, well, that's a variety I want. And you can go and look at the variety name. You see several other ones here that are above 100%. There's one about 2/3 of the way down. That's 118% of average. And so that would be a good one to choose. But one of the main points I want to leave you with before I move to the next slide is that the highest yielding white clovers are the Ladino type. Those are a larger type white clover. And so if you just want a higher yielding, then a Ladino type is a good one, but it's even better to go and look at the specific variety and how it's performed in our trials. Now, many people, in fact, most people planting white clover, are not planting it in a hayfield, they're planting it in a pasture. And they want to know, most of all, how well is it going to survive in pasture? So the Ladino type will survive in pasture, but it's important to have a good rotational grazing program so they're not overgrazed. But if you look here at our grazing tolerance report and see how well white clover varieties have survived under grazing, that will help give you that information. What's the one that's going to survive best in pasture? Maybe I'm not going to be able to use as much rotational grazing. Maybe I'm going to have longer grazing periods. So I want one that will survive there. So go a close-up of this. You'll notice, you look down the right-hand side, this is 88% of average. This is 120% of average. So yeah, that's one you'd like to choose. Another one, 123% of average. I want to point out both those are good choices. I intentionally haven't left the variety name because I don't want to promote particular varieties. You notice that those are intermediate types, that hybrid between Ladino and a Dutch white clover. We also list the proprietor, the company that are selling these products. Now, Barenbrug USA is not actually a dealer it's a retail dealer. They often sell through smaller distributors. But if you get on the Barenbrug website, if you can't find that particular variety, then they would easily tell you who is selling in Kentucky. So that's the grazing tolerance. So the intermediate type are really good choices for good grazing tolerance in pasture. If you want the top yield, the top performance, the top ones even having higher nitrogen fixation, the Ladino type makes sense, as long as you're careful with your grazing. Okay, I want to move into tall fescue. Here's an example of tall fescue being grazed. Here's our tall fescue and brome grass report. There's actually several brome grass species, including smooth brome grass, meadow brome grass, and others. That's more of a niche type forage in Kentucky, but tall fescue is definitely the best, most well-adapted perennial cool season grass in the state. So here's a table in the most recent report. Very top of the table says that it was a test planted in September 22nd, 2017 in Princeton, Kentucky. You see we have commercial varieties listed. We also have experimental varieties, like some of Dr. Phillips' varieties that would have the KY at the beginning, or other companies' varieties. You won't be able to go buy an experimental, but it helps the companies decide what's best adapted to Kentucky. We've also listed the endophyte status. Is it a novel endophyte, endophyte free, or Kentucky 31 we have toxic because of the toxic endophyte there. We list other things for all the perennial cool season grasses. We list maturity. The larger the number, the closer it is into being in seed head production. So if you want a late maturing tall fescue or a late maturing orchard grass, for example, you would choose one with a lower number in our maturity rating. And the footnote to these tables explains that. We list percent stand, talking about how well the varieties are surviving over time. And then we have yield. Now you'll notice, so the commercial varieties I've circled, then I'm circling here the yield of those commercial varieties. There's not much difference between the yield of the bottom one I've circled and the top one I've circled, and there's little asterisks by each one of those. That indicates that there's no statistical difference between any of those. So just because one is higher on the table than the other, if they have asterisks beside them, then all of them are really the same yield. Now, but this is only the testing that we had in 2019, and I'm actually I think I've cut off the 2018 results here. But my point I want to make is you don't want to just look at 1 year. Ideally, you want to look at several years, either in the individual report or in the summary report. I did talk a lot in the field about the novel tall fescue varieties, with the novel endophyte providing better long-term survival than an endophyte-free and not having the toxicity of Kentucky 31. So I've listed the majority of the commercially available novel endophyte varieties. You'll notice that they all have two names. They have the name of the variety. They have the name of the novel endophyte. From the long-term summary, here's the table 16, listing all of the tall fescues. So you see those on the left-hand side of the page. The endophyte status is listed, the proprietor, the company. You see all these lines showing how well they've done in each test over the years. The very first one would be a fescue test planted in Lexington in 2003. And then you've got the summary at the end, or the average. So a little closer up, you see the varieties listed, endophyte status, and here's their average production. So we've got several there. Kentucky 31 is 102% of average. We kind of know that it's going to perform well. You just have that toxicity issue. You've got a couple there that are doing as well, are the same as Kentucky 31. You've got other ones that are lower than average. So those might be ones you do not choose unless you have a particular need, like that Tower Protect is actually a very palatable tall fescue. So it might fit into a dairy grazing operation, or maybe raising stockers trying to get some good weight gain. Our spring planted cereals. You see there when you're looking at your screen, there's oats, spring oats in the left. There's the wheat there in the middle. I talked a fair bit about that in the field, of the value of planting spring oats for getting that kind of quick growth. 60 days, you've got a hay cutting of a fairly high quality forage, and the disadvantage of planting wheat. So if you want more details, you go to our annual grass report. It not only has the cool season, the cereals, it also has the warm seasons. It has cereals that we plant in the fall, annual ryegrass that we plant in the fall, and like I say, the range of warm seasons. So if you're thinking about planting oats, you could just go to the feed store and buy oats, horse feed oats, and plant those, and those would work, but you notice that there are some definitely improvements in varieties, and you'll see a number here that are well above average. The common is just kind of a cover crop oat or a feed oat. We only had it in one test the last few years, and it was just 89% of average. Here's an example in sorghum Sudan grass in the field. So I wanted to mention just really quickly, many people are interested in a warm season annual they can plant, they can harvest, they can graze, maybe they can even take a hay cutting. Sudan grass is really probably the best option for that, as far as a very productive species that you can cut for hay. There's a few other options like teff or crabgrass, but Sudan grass establishes well, very productive, has a smaller stem than the sorghum Sudan in the pearl millet. So we've got the varieties listed, the distributor, their yields, and how they've done over time. You'll notice that several are well above average. And maybe you say, well, I don't want to know just where they're at compared to the average. I want to know how many tons am I going to get in planting this. It's kind of expensive to plant this every summer. So you go to the individual report, that annual grass report, and then you look at how the actual tonnage, the Sudan grass, for example, has ranged from about 3.5 tons per summer season to up to 5.5 to 6. But you can get that information from the individual report. I'm going to end now with a couple of slides reminding you about the Kentucky Forage and Grassland Council, the value of being a member, getting also a membership in the American Forage and Grassland Council. The Forage News, go to Google KY Forages, get that Forage website to pop up. You can subscribe to the newsletter. You can download the PDF version and read that, or print that off to read that. I definitely want to highlight our Kentucky Forages YouTube channel. Dr. Chris Torch, when he started here 3.5 years ago, he started this KY Forages YouTube channel and been very successful in his career at Virginia Tech, and very thankful for how he's using this and recording most of the presentations that we give when we have all-day meetings. And even this presentation we'll put up on this website. So you can subscribe and get emails reminding you when new content's there, or you can just go to this. Again, Google KY Forages YouTube, or on the YouTube channel, put KY Forages. You'll get the presentations that we've given and that visiting speakers have given in Kentucky.